Good morning. This is Notes from Underground. So here's a picture that was, I'd stumbled across a few weeks back, and at first I didn't think much of it. It's a farming scene, maybe in the early 20th century, and it seemed fairly innocuous. Um, You have clearly this is hops farming. If anyone, maybe in Germany, could be Germany. Um, and you have a father with I guess his children. This is his family, and it seems like a kind of a pastoral scene. And so it very much has a lot of the characteristics of um, some of the modes of production in a kind of early modernity, capitalistic society. Um, Maybe has, again, being farming. It has a kind of a pre-industrial feel. Um, you kind of see the father as the head of the family. He's on stilts, and he's kind of if you look at here, he's in control of the hierarchy here, and the children are at an interesting point in their life where they're being kind of indoctrinated into this culture, this farming culture. And it's interesting because I was also thinking if you could also kind of pull back, and if this, let's say this took place kind of 1100 years ago in Greece, the symbols would have changed a lot. You would have um, the man would represent someone like Mercury, maybe, or Hermes, the messenger god, and these would be nymphs in the field, forest nymphs. I don't know if there's such a thing as farming nymphs. I'm sure there were, and they're kind of the helpers, and Hermes is bringing a message to them. But I think that's interesting if you can just flip that over and you give it that 20th century view. It's now coming down to this very human hierarchy and mode of production, where you're bringing your children into the craft, deep into the craft. And what I see here is, so here's a man with his offspring. If you look at the two children, you have the older boy. Clearly he wants to fit in to the farming culture. He's accepted it. He's trying to learn stuff. He's listening to the father fairly. I mean, he's squinting. Clearly there's sun in his eye, but he's taking instruction from the father. Again, the daughter, who looks close to the same age, same thing. She's all into this culture. But it's very funny because when you start looking at the boy, he's younger. I mean, he's almost like, he's more, I guess if we had to use the Greek, he's more like Dionysian. He's driven by emotion. There's a lot of conflict going on in that child. He's halfway between, I want to fit in, I want to feel that the elders are taking me seriously. And if you look at it, to him, the elders are the kid, his older sister, older brother, and the father. Father being the kind of almost sun king in this scenario. But you see him; he is torn because, again, a child at that age just wants love, and they will participate in some of these rituals just for love. He just wants to hug his father's leg. I can tell that's where his object is, and then he's kind of torn between his father's leg and then this extension, these stilts of his father's leg, and he wants to. He will settle for the hugging of the wood eventually. I mean, I can tell when he's gone through this battle in his head, when emotions do finally win out, he will accept it, and then he will probably be reprimanded for it because his father would be worried that it could knock him off the stilts. He's not used to having that kind of weight pulling on the stilt, and it could create for kind of tension, and that's interesting because you start thinking about a picture like this, and then the long-term effects of the dynamics that exist in it. Um, so you have a child where you kind of have this prosthetic limb, the stilt, which is kind of a proxy for his familial love. Um, but he is very distracted. He's being like, if there was like one school here, and the school was called Hops Farming in the early 20th century, this child is in many different schools. He's not just attending that. He's barely in that school. He is really at a point of internal strife. That we all hope that it turned out well. Not all these things turn out well. Sometimes they do wind up on the psychiatrist's couch. I mean, that's where these things can wind up. There's a lot of, for that kind of the kind of confusion that's entering that child at this point. Because what you see here is, again, it's anytime human beings use tools. It's usually some kind of extension for themselves. These stilts is allowing him to extend his ability to, hit different points in space at a very very higher from a higher perspective. But we also have other attempts where binoculars. Those are something that extend the human vision. You have sometimes if someone cups their ear with their hand, that's a way of extending their ear to take in more sound. So you have, I guess, when someone wants, a child is looking at his father and he sees all of this apparatus around his father, I can see that it can create a lot of cognitive dissonance in the child, trying to figure out where his family, where his father, where they end, and where all these prosthetics of the culture begin. And you could see very easily a child could wind up on a psychiatrist's couch later, kind of unpacking these issues. I always thought that's why, because that's probably one of the most interesting things about this photo is to start thinking, what do these children dream? What do they dream of? What are their dreams at night? You have this kind of interaction during the day. Some of